Hey everyone, it's Tony here. Today we'll be looking at another subscriber request video. This is by far my most requested person. It's Slavoj Zizek or Žižek, a pretty famous philosopher slash intellectual of our modern times. He comes from Slovenia, and I can see why you guys have requested him in terms of difficulty. He's one of the hardest people I've had to type so far, so I'll do my best to be objective here. Before we go into the analysis, I want to quickly cover some theory that comes from Kyung and the Temperaments. So, in Kyung's book on personality theory, please understand me too, in his chapter on the NTs and the rationals, he states the following. Rationals prefer to appear unemotional when they communicate, and they can seem rather stiff, trying to minimize body language, facial expression, and other nonverbal qualifiers as much as possible. But when they become animated, their characteristic hand gestures express their need for precision and control. NTs will make one or both hands into claws or talons as if to seize the idea they are discussing. They will also bend their fingers and grasp the space in front of them, turning and shaping their ideas into the air. They will use their fingers like a calculator, ticking off point after point, and they will take small objects at hand, salt and pepper shakers, pens, and paperweights, and arrange them on a table or desk to help map out their ideas. But perhaps the most telling gesture of all is the apposition of the thumb against the fingertips, as if the NT is bringing an idea or an argument to the finest possible point and is savoring the precision. So, based on the clips we've just seen, so far so good, but not so fast. Let's compare that now to the SJs or the Guardians. Kyung states, Guardians usually avoid showy hand gestures when they speak, but when they do get animated, out come the hands. The index finger wags in warning, or the fist rises in front of them, not the square, menacing fist of the SPs, but a fist with the thumb atop the curled index finger as if holding the reins and driving a team of horses. And perhaps most familiar of all, SJs will bring out one or both hands swiftly down in a chopping motion to emphasize their statements or to cut off further discussion, something Truman himself did when he summed up the responsibility of the presidency. The buck stops here. So what in the world do we do now? Because according to what we just saw, the hand movements, what Kyung describes, they both seem to fit. And that's a problem, but the general gist of it is this. These are fundamentals. Remember, they're used to describe temperaments, not types. They'll work most of the time, but it's important to remember that in typology, nothing ever works 100% of the time, which is why I always recommend being skeptical to what you hear when it comes to this stuff, even from what I'm saying and what I've said in my own videos. You have to take what works for you and apply it to your own understanding. As far as why there's a connection here, I'll offer my own proposition at the end of this video, so let's go ahead and get into the analysis here.
Slavoj Zizek is here. He is a philosopher who describes himself as a complicated communist. The New Republic once described him as the most dangerous philosopher in the West. He has written on topics ranging from Karl Marx to the animated film Kung Fu Panda. Earlier this month, he spoke at Occupy Wall Street. I am pleased to have him here at this table. In this initial conversation, we'll try to understand not only where he came from, what does he believe, and his observations on what he sees today in terms of the political environment. So welcome.
Thanks very much. I'm honored to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
For a long time, I watched PBS. It's much better than all those other channels on...
Well, on behalf of PBS, I thank you.
Thank you.
We're pleased to have you in the audience. I hope occasionally you'll be amused, occasionally you'll learn something, occasionally you will find reasons to throw something at your television.
No, I will tell you very seriously that I learned through channels like PBS to get rid of this European arrogance, We Europeans, through intellectual, vulgar United States. No, you don't get, especially in this present turn towards education or whatever public TV, which should more serve social needs, so that they are cutting off all intellectual stuff from TV programs. Europe is much worse than United States.
In terms of its intellectual arrogance and
no. In terms simply of the true vivacity of intellectual life. Don't be ashamed, even intellectually, to be Americans.
Okay, so there was that finger wagging, and apart from that, we've heard two different value assessments. One of PBS versus other channels, the other of Europe versus America in his own opinion.
Do you like America?
Why not? I'm saying this absolutely sincerely. Although, I must add,
Yes.
as an amusing remark, please don't take it too seriously. You know who was absolutely fascinated with America?
Who?
Stalin.
Stalin. The way he said that with this utter conviction and confidence, this very matter-of-fact statement, it screams of TE to me.
You know, when he was asked in late 20s, can he define the ideal profile of a Bolshevik communist? He said a combination of Russian tenacity, fidelity to a cause, and American dynamic, pragmatic spirit.
Why are you fascinated by Stalin?
It's a very sad story. Far from me being in any way crypto-Stalinist, I think that the Stalinist phenomenon in the 20th century was something so terrifying. Things went so monstrously wrong that we don't yet really have a theory, a real understanding of what went wrong. I don't buy all these standard explanations, you know, fanatics ready to sacrifice living people for the idea or whatever. All this is way too simple for me. Things went so terribly wrong in a totally different way from fascism.
And they hated everybody. There was a process. There wasn't any specific group. It was everybody, including each other.
Absolutely. This is, for example, already one thing that people don't get it. It was a suicidal regime. I mean, are we aware of the monstrosity at the climactic point of the Stalinist terror, mid-30s? Yeah. You know what was absolutely the most dangerous place to be? A member of Central Committee. Look at the names in the Central Committee from 34 to 37.
One by one, boom, boom, boom.
80% boom, boom, boom.
Right.
What? So, you know, it's not... This is already the wrong perception. Some elite group of fanatical communists killing ordinary people. No, killing each other.
Yeah, in fact, the man who was doing the killing in Barrio, they went boom, boom to him.
This is why, at the end, but this is why Beria probably, if not organized the death of Stalin,
right,
prevented doctors' help, because Beria knew what Stalin was doing. When Stalin nominated a new secret police boss, he immediately nominated someone who was formally just second in command, but whose task was to prepare a dossier to get rid at a later stage and of him. Right. So Beria knew he's next. He's next in the line to be shot.
So tell me what you do.
All right, so Slavoj, he's coming off as someone who is extremely knowledgeable of the facts and of history, and he's using it to supply his arguments and his statements in relation to what's being asked. So if you remember, he was like, in the late 20s, Stalin said this. When he was asked about this, he said this quote, almost word for word, and then later on it was like this in the mid-30s. Just look at the names in the Central Committee between 34 and 37. 80% of these people were executed, so far and so forth. So it really looks like an SINE axis or NESI axis, because this is someone who is really recalling the facts and information at ease, especially subjects that he's talking about, and he's also comparing them in relation to other things or what the interviewer is asking him.
I'm lucky. I'm not kidding. There is irony in it. And my, ironically, gratitude goes to communist regime. You know why? In the early 1970s, 73, when I finished my postgraduate studies, I was already accepted to be assistant professor, to make a career there.
This was where?
73, Ljubljana, Slovenia, ex-Yugoslavia.
Right.
Then immediately, afterwards, like a couple of months after, there was a counter-offensive of hardline communists, the last Indian summer of hardline communism. So, I didn't get a job. For 6-7 years I was unemployed, but it wasn't too bad. I was doing translations and so on, supported by my parents. And then a miracle happened. Then they got me a job at some marginal institute for social sciences. The idea was, I'm not a complete idiot, so they gave me a job, but marginal institute to prevent public influence and contact with students. I'm still there. It means permanent sabbatical. I have absolutely all the freedom to do whatever I want.
But you're known around the world, American students. I mean, you're high up on the list of sort of people that they want to hear.
Yeah, to hear it's okay, but I don't like to lose too much time with debates. I'm very misanthropic, you know. I think that most of the people are boring, stupid, and so on. I don't like to lose time. They told me, oh, you should debate with students, you will discover new ideas. Maybe not. Maybe it will be just loss of time, you know.
Well,
I find that very interesting because Slavoj is someone who's known as, being a philosopher, someone who's very good at debate. But at the same time, it seems that he doesn't value those things in as much as he does spending an efficient use of his time, like writing books, for example.
Isn't there a dance place named after you in Buenos Aires?
This is such a brutal irony. It's not a joke what I will tell you now. Yeah. People think, oh, I'm extrovert, half crazy, but I have my problems. Never in my life, and never is not a metaphor for just once a year, never did I dance or sing. I'm psychologically unable to do it.
You never could dance.
No.
You don't have this
motor
skills.
Too obscene. It's too, it's the obscenity of gestures. I cannot do it.
Yeah. So
I'll try to get back to this later. Right now, let's change things up a bit and go to another clip where he's debating Jordan Peterson.
You mentioned, first, where did you find the data that I simply don't see it? Okay, let me begin by this. You designate your, under quotation marks, I'm not characterizing here, enemy, or what you are fighting against, as sometimes you call it postmodern Neo Marxism. I know what you mean. All this, from political correctness to these excesses of whatever, spirit of envy, and so on and so on. Do you think they are really, where did you find this data? I don't know them. I would ask you here, give me some names or whatever. Where are the Marxists here? I don't know any. Who is a Marxist here? Show me any big names of political correctness. I think they fear like a good vampire fears garlic. This is why.
That was a pretty quick-witted analogy, the vampires and garlic thing. Definitely a sign of extroverted intuition, in my opinion. But let's keep watching and see what happens here.
They are already, the one who is not a Marxist, but at least approaches economic topic, Bernie Sanders, he is already under attack as white male and all that stuff and so on. My problem would be this one. What you describe as postmodern Neo-Marxism, where is really the Marxist element in it? They are for equality. Sorry, where? They are for equality at these cultural struggles, proper names, how do we call each other? Do you see in them, in political correctness and so on, any genuine will to change society? I don't see it. I think it's a hyper-moralization, which is a silent admission of a defeat. That's my problem. Why do you call, it's not a rhetorical question for politely saying you are an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. It's simply, I would like to know, because you, and I like this often, when you attack somebody, you said aggressively, and what should? Read more, tell me, whom. So I'm asking you now, not read more, I don't advise you, but who are? Give me some names and so on, and who are these postmodern, egalitarian, neo-Marxist, and where do you see any kind even of Marxism? I see in it mostly an utterly impotent moralization.
Try not to get too caught up with the topic at hand or which views you align with more or which person you like more. When you're trying to type someone, it's important that you try to remain as neutral as possible and just gather information, whatever you can, to be more accurate. So from what we've heard, Slavoj in this debate, he's looking for the facts. He wants the sources, like, show me the money. Where are you getting this stuff from?
Please, I'm so sorry that I was too
No, that's no problem.
Please.
Well, I mean, organization like Jonathan Haidt's, what's it called? Heterodox Academy and other organizations like that have documented an absolute dearth of conservative voices in the social sciences and the humanities, and about 25%, according to the what I think are reliable surveys, approximately 25% of social scientists in the US identify themselves as Marxists. And so there's that.
But where are the
Well,
results?
okay, but
Can you name me
let's go
one?
to
I know a couple of Marxists. For example, who does very solid economic work. Although I don't totally. David Harvey, one. But he writes very serious books of economic analysis and so on and so on. Then there is the old guy who is far from simplification, Frederick Jameson and so on. But they are totally marginalized today. In this politically correct mainstream, you know, I don't see.
Well, yeah, your question seemed to me to focus more on the peculiar relationship that I've noticed and that people have disputed between postmodernism and neo-Marxism. And I see the connection between the postmodernist types and the Marxists as a sleight of hand that replaced the notion of the oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie.
Okay, so we could go on and on looking at different clips, but we need to reach a conclusion here. So let me just say this. Based on what I've seen, I'm not sure which type he is. I don't feel as confident about Slavoj as I usually do typing other celebrities. So instead, we'll consider two different types here about, what he could potentially be. All right, so let's go with the obvious answer first. ENTP. Why ENTP? Well, if you do a basic Google search, you'll find that on most forums and websites, at least for typology, most people have typed him as ENTP, and I think most of that stems off of stereotypes, such as ENTP being, the archetype of the debater, the anti-hero, the devil's advocate, someone who's very intellectual, logical, rational, good at taking things apart. And you can even stretch that as far to other stereotypes, such as male NTPs not caring how they look in public, wearing socks with sandals and a tie-dye shirt and Barbie sunglasses, somehow looking good all the while, which can be true a lot of times. But those stereotypes sort of fit Slavoj's general persona, how the public views him. And that's, I think, why those stereotypes kind of work. If we look at the functions, it's harder to argue in that way. I mean, we can say that like dominant NE, it's very good with intangible things, conceptual things, finding, patterns. Especially with TI, this combination, NE will find loopholes in someone's argument for like a debate, for example. TI will deconstruct even further, find logical fallacies. The only problem is I have a problem with TI and FE for Slavoj. This axis right here, it's just pale and I don't feel good about it based on the footage that we've seen. I know there's plenty of other clips we could have looked at, but generally speaking, I have a problem with accepting TI and FE as his preferred functions. 6.TE is probably the strongest argument that we can make for him being an ENTP, someone who is really knowledgeable of facts, sources, constructing his own arguments. He knows how to do that. So it's strong. It's just a question of how strong. Again, with FE, I have a problem with this axis. I don't know. I would need to see more evidence. 7 FI. Again, going with like this anti-hero archetype of the ENTP, sometimes Slavoj really does say things that are inappropriate, that are out of context, that can easily offend other people. He's done so in the past. So maybe it's there, but at the same time, especially in the first clip with Charlie Rose, he did care about being sincere and authentic, and he did share his own opinions and values on things. So again, problematic. Forethought aside, this one is probably the most deceiving of all because the forethought's generally looked at as inferior. But of course, Slavoj is aged. With time and experience, the cognitive functions get stronger. And one of the particular things that I've noticed about NE DOMs, if you get in an argument with them, like a debate or something, and they get passionate enough to care, they will remember word for word what you said, and they can very easily use that against you. So that's my argument for ENTP. Let's go on to the next one. All right, next up, the ESTJ, and I have to go fast here because I'm running out of time. ESTJs, so I don't really care about the stereotypes that are associated with that type. Of course, people won't associate Slavoj with ESTJ just based on his appearance and, you know, the successful businessman that does things by the book or whatever. TE DOMs, think of like Robert De Niro, for example. I see Slavoj as a more eccentric version of Robert De Niro because he's got that serious, stern, kind of emotionless, rigid face, that poker face that TE DOMs have. And it's just, he's just very matter of fact, just like, get to the point, show me where this is coming from. I want to see the facts. I want to see the sources. He's just very blunt, practical, rational. He's interested in what works, and that's it. SI is like an information sponge. So all this knowledge that he's stored of like the Soviet Union and of Marxism, he can just recall facts so easily, which is a trademark of the SJs because they all have strong SI. And of course, these two, you know, this is outside of what we've looked at, but Slavoj is a polyglot. He can speak more. He can speak like 5 to 6 languages or something like that. TE is just going to learn things by, you know, what are the rules, regulations, structure of language, you know, the rhetoric, logic, grammar, just what is it? Give me it and I'll learn it. I'm not going to ask why. I just do what works. That's TE, and SI remembers. The 6 slot SE, the animated hand movements, the willpower, the strength, the passion that he has within him, it comes out, especially when he talks about something that he cares about. I'll get into the hand movements in just a second. 3rd slot NE, he had that quick, witty, you know, vampire garlic remark, but this is very subtle, but he does make connections and how things are, you know, related, interconnected, but through what is already known. So, you know, when Charlie Rose asked him about what his thoughts are on America, he's like, okay, well, Stalin thought about this, which is related to this, but during this year, he said this when he was asked this, and, you know, so on and so forth. Very knowledgeable about the subjects that he's studied, and he takes it very seriously. 7th slot NI, he had some debate where he was talking about like death to ideology or something, where he's like very, ESTJs in general are very anti-woo-woo. They don't like dealing with things that haven't been proven, that are a bit like airy-fairy, even like MBTI. They generally don't, they're just not interested generally. And it's interesting if we take Jordan as an ENTJ and Slavoj as an ESTJ, because they're both rational thinkers, but Jordan's going to want to go towards that bigger picture, see how things are connected conceptually, whereas Slavoj is always bringing him down to a more grounded, practical level. That's just a constant theme that flows throughout that debate. 4th slot FI, in the first clip that we saw, he did care about, you know, being sincere, about stating his own opinion, his own values. The FI was there. I think 4th slot FI is very appropriate, and of course these two have just gotten stronger with age and experience. So those are my 2 types that I think he could be. Of course he could be another type. I'm going to finish up for now, but before I do that, I want to go into the hand movement thing that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Okay guys, so before I get into what I'm about to get into, look, if you are still learning the basics of the MBTI, like the temperaments and personality theory, you don't have to worry about this stuff. It's going to be too complicated, and it just takes time to get there. Look, it's all good. You don't have to listen to what I'm about to say. It's more for the like advanced people out there that have, you know, been around the block, so to speak, when it comes to typology and personality theory and all that. But it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of this video with Kiersey's description of hand movements regarding temperaments in his book, Please Understand Me Too. It's a great book to read. I don't necessarily agree with everything that Kiersey has to say, but it's brilliant in terms of like the metaphors that he uses and the descriptions that he has about the types and the temperaments. So it's noob friendly. It's a really good text to get into. Now, the problem was at the beginning of this video is that I used Kiersey's theory of hand movements in regards to temperaments. So the SJ guardians, the NT rationals, and I showed how just through that one clip, Slavoj was demonstrating both hand movements and gestures. So obviously that's a problem because we don't want to say that someone is both an SJ and an NT. So what the heck is going on here? And that leads me to my hypothesis here. So if, according to Kiersey's theory about the hand movements specifically, and only the hand movements, I want to make that very clear. So if Slavoj demonstrates hand movements indicative of both SJ and NT temperaments, then it is most probable that there's some sort of common factor between them, between those two temperaments, that he's sort of a link to. So the question is, what is that common factor? If you want to try and figure this out by yourself, I'd recommend pausing the video now. Okay, so here's my quote-unquote proposition as to the connection or the common factor, whatever you want to call it, between these two temperaments and why Slavoj is, showing a connection here, showing a common factor. But before I do that, I want to explain something that's really important. There's typologists out there who are, very fundamental, that just go strictly with the four temperaments and that's it. So like going all the way back to ancient Greece, they'll be like, okay, there's the artisans, the guardians, the idealists, the rationals, and that's it. There's no, if we go deeper into that, then it's just problems, right? So they reject the types, they reject the functions, but they keep the temperaments. Then there's also typologists that accept the temperaments, but also accept the general characteristics of the types. So the 16 MBTI types that were developed by, Myers and Briggs in the 1940s. And then there's people like me that not only use the temperaments, not only use the types, but also the functions, specifically the 8-slot model, because I've just seen it work time and time again. Of course, I have my own understanding of it, but this is what I do, and this is why it's controversial, what I'm about to show you. But like I said, we're looking for a common factor here. So what I've done is I've shown the temperaments, I've shown the types within them, those temperaments, and I've provided the first two functions of those types. Why the first two? Because they're core in our upbringing. One of them will be the way that we perceive the world, the other one will be the way that we judge the world. So ways of processing information. And what I did was I tried considering if there's some sort of common factor, if there's some sort of confluence between these two temperaments, if we break down the temperaments into types, and if we break down those types into functions or a function slot. So what I noticed was that, we can see that TE, extroverted thinking, is the only, and I repeat, the only function that is shared between the personality types within these temperaments. SI doesn't work because it's only for the SJs. TI doesn't work because only the INTPs and ENTPs, if we're considering only the first two, use it. However, there's a pattern with TE here because TE crosses over into both temperaments. So in other words, we can say that there are types within these two temperaments that use TE, so there's some sort of connection here. There's some sort of common factor. Now, for some of you that are into socionics or more advanced systems like that, you might pick up on the fact that, well, this is just the TJ temperament. Because like I've said in my other videos, there's other temperaments out there. It's just that the four main ones, going back to Plato and Kiersey, the SPs, SJs, NTs, NFs. Those are the main ones that's just generally accepted to work. So we have the TJs, the ISTJs, ESTJs, INTJs, ENTJs, and of course they all have strong extroverted thinking. And I've also included the ENTP type here because they're sort of a wild card when it comes to TE. They have it in their 6th. Based on my own experience, based on what I've seen work, the 6th is strong. It's the most strong out of the 4 unconscious or quote-unquote shadow functions. So I also wanted to include the ENTP here. And I still stand by my previous statement that it's possible that Slavoj is also an ENTP. So basically what we have here is that 4 out of the 8 types in this SJ-NT relationship have strong TE. Now the TJs will obviously have it'll just be natural to them because they prefer it and they're conscious of it. If you want to go a bit deeper, we can say that even 5 out of 8 of these types within the temperaments use TE, or at least have strong TE, if we consider the 6th slot. So like I said, the ENTP wildcard here. So what does this all mean? What am I getting at? Well, my conclusion is that as Slavoj demonstrates characteristics of both SJ and NT hand movements, just hand movements according to Keirsey, it is most probable that there is a common factor between them that Slavoj is demonstrating. And as TE is the only cognitive function that's shared by those personality types within the temperaments. So again, I'm kind of like reverse engineering here. It's most probable that TE is the common factor, and therefore it's most likely that Slavoj is a TE user. Again, I know this is a bit much. It's just theory. I want to share it with you guys, see what you guys think. I know I went a little bit deep, but really the goal of me showing this to you is just to kind of lead you guys back to the basics, to the fundamentals, and to show you that there's so much there that is often overlooked by most people. There's a lot of patterns to be found there. And yeah, to just show that the more experience that you have, the more time that you spend, the hours that you put into doing this stuff, you just start to notice patterns. And this is just one of them. I know it's advanced, but hopefully you've enjoyed. I don't think you'll find this anywhere else. So if you found this interesting, give me a like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.